So first things first, an introduction to the safety case report. So the need for the safety case report and generally safety risk reporting is obviously a direct result of the Building Safety Act coming in. That mandates that for all new and existing higher risk buildings, and I'll kind of get a bit further into what that means in practice in a couple of slides. For all such buildings, they need to have an assessment of their safety risks, and that's primarily from a structural and a fire perspective. The Act itself picks this up as part of clauses 83 and 84, which broadly just notes that building owners need to carry out an assessment and manage safety risks on their properties. It's statutory instrument 907 that more specifically elaborates as to what that means. So that sets out what it's called the prescribed principles in terms of that risk assessment process. So identifying building safety risks and then managing them in a suitable way. And it's the same statutory instrument that then actually explicitly introduces the safety case report as a means to do so. So broadly, that identifies that the person who's responsible for the building, the principal accountable person, has to work through a process to show that they understand their building and how it operates and any safety risks associated with it. That's obviously the kind of the pure legislation. What the HSE have done is on their gov.uk website, they've given a kind of slightly more user-friendly interpretation of what actually goes into a safety case report and what principal accountable people need to do. So this is as per the website reference in the bottom right. It's a very useful resource. There's a lot of content in there. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I will pick out some of the key points just to help set the scene, provide some context as to what the safety case report is looking to achieve in a wider sense, to then help contextualize what we as structural engineers will generally need to feed into that process. So first things first, purpose of the safety case report is fundamentally to set out building safety risks associated with high-rise residential buildings and how they're managed. The definition of a high-rise building is broadly 7 stories or at least 18 meters high, or and containing 2 residential units. I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. And as mentioned, it's primarily looking at safety risks associated with the spread of fire or smoke and with structural failure of the building. And there's obviously a degree of overlap between 2 as well, which we'll talk about later. Any such buildings must be registered with the Building Safety Regulator, the BSA, before people can live there. So it applies to all buildings, so even new build high-risk buildings, before they can actually be occupied and used, they need to have a safety case in place. Obviously, the difference there is that if you've just designed and built the building, then the information hopefully is readily to hand, whereas if it's a building that was built 10, 15 years ago, that may not be quite a straightforward process. So in terms of HRB definition, so the gov.uk website that I referenced goes into an awful lot of detail to help you define what is a higher risk building and to help principal accountable people to identify whether their buildings qualify or not. In basic terms, as I mentioned, it's a 7-story building or a building that's at least 18 meters high, and that height is measured from the ground level to the top occupied floor. So if you've got like a rooftop plant room or kind of green roof, etc., that doesn't necessarily count. There are all sorts of nuances within there. So if the ground level varies, or if you have kind of local occupied rooms and things, then there's a lot more guidance on the website. So again, place to look if you're sort of trying to clarify. In terms of the definition of a residential unit, it's I think, deliberately quite broad definition that it's a dwelling or any other unit of living accommodation. So there's a bit more explanation on the website, but it's, I think, deliberately vague to make sure that more buildings are included, certainly buildings where people will be there overnight and therefore at risk of any issues occurring. There are some exclusions that are noted explicitly within the guidance. So if the entire building is used for one of the following uses, so a hospital, care home, a secure residential institution such as a prison, hotels and hostels, or military barracks, those fall outside as long as the entirety of the building is used for that purpose. If you have, for example, a hotel where the top 2 stories are actually residential units, then that would still qualify as a high risk building. Broadly, the logic is that these are kind of more actively managed facilities. So if you've got a hotel, for example, you'll have a kind of concierge, you'll have a full evacuation plan for residents, and people obviously go to a hotel expecting there to be a fire escape strategy. If it's a prison, you'll obviously have active supervision of inmates, etc. in a residential unit, because people live there and kind of it's generally maybe a bit more free form, which I think is why those are treated differently. When is a safety case needed? So as I mentioned, that's needed from the second that a new building becomes, or before people can move into a new higher risk building. Alternatively, if it's an existing building, you need to effectively, as soon as the regulator calls for it, or as soon as you become the PAP, if you're kind of taking ownership of an existing building. The plan is that these risk assessments and safety case reports are updated on a 5-yearly basis, is the current plan. So it's a kind of ongoing maintenance and update process through the life of the building. I've mentioned principal accountable persons already. So broadly speaking, any accountable person is someone who has a legal obligation to repair or look after a part of the building. And the principal accountable person is the kind of overriding person in control. It's usually an organisation, it's like a Commonwealth Association or a local authority, and they take ultimate responsibility for pulling together the safety case report. They aren't necessarily responsible for producing every single aspect of it, as we'll come on to, but it's their kind of global responsibility to actually assemble and submit the safety case and to register the building. As a final kind of introductory note, the BSA relatively recently have published their review criteria that they use for the safety case report reviewing. So it's effectively a series of tables that show the kind of areas that they're looking for and the questions they're trying to answer. So it's quite useful in helping to structure what they're looking for and what level of detail they're looking for. So that's definitely something to bear in mind. And that guidance, I'm sure, will continue to evolve over time as they review a larger number of safety case reports and start to find common issues and questions that they need to answer.